Welcome to the Workers' Reading Room. Today I'll be reading Chapter 10 of F.I.S.T. by Joe Eszterhas. But first, a quick recap. The previous chapter began with Mike Monahan showing Johnny how to drive a truck. The pair drive to a diner that Mike frequents, and Mike learns that his old driving buddy Joe Harper is sick, his kidneys battered from years of driving. Later on, Johnny and Abe go to a trucking company to try to sign men up for F.I.S.T. The men are obviously afraid to talk to them, the company constantly watching them. But it's not just the company that stops the men from joining, it's also the weak leadership of F.I.S.T., Mark Rafferty. Johnny eventually manages to convince some men, including a stubborn old trucker named Tom Higgins, to attend a union meeting at a church. At the meeting, Johnny shows up with Joe Harper and explains that the union can help the workers just like they're helping Joe. This resulted in hundreds of men signing up. Having caught the attention of the trucking companies, Johnny is approached by Arthur St. Clair of Consolidated Trucking and offers Johnny a job, in an attempt to bribe him. Johnny tells St. Clair to leave, and later Johnny is viciously beaten by a group of hired thugs as a message from the company. At the next union meeting, Johnny attempts to get the men to act, but Mark Rafferty, president of F.I.S.T., convinces the men that a strike is dangerous, and what really matters is paying union dues on time. After the meeting, at Ziggy Zagon's tavern, Rafferty makes comments accusing Johnny of taking from the company, at least eventually. This infuriates Johnny and he leaves the bar, Abe behind him, with Abe getting himself a date with Molly on the way out the door. And now, F.I.S.T., Chapter 10. In the executive conference room on the 8th floor of the Talbot building overlooking Public Square, Winthrop Talbot carefully lighted a cigar and blew the white smoke to the ceiling. He was 63 years old, a lean, ramrod straight man with chiseled features who wore a checked heavy tweed suit. The room mirrored his rugged masculinity. Leather chairs, a massive oak table, framed photographs on the wall showing Winthrop Talbot hunting, Winthrop Talbot playing polo, Winthrop Talbot in uniforms, his arm around Teddy Roosevelt's shoulders. Around the table sat his son, Philip, 32 years old, the vice president of Talbot's Consolidated Trucking Company, who shared his father's penchant for tweed, as well as his leanness. Arthur St. Clair, the company counsel, and Russell Fitzpatrick, the company treasurer, an owlish, deacon-like man. Winthrop Talbot puffed on a cigar and grinned. "I should do what John D. did," he said. "Walk about the universe handing out dimes. Eh, Philip? Then we shouldn't have these problems." "I don't think so, Dad," Philip Talbot laughed. "Seriously now, Arthur," Winthrop Talbot turned to St. Clair. "What exactly is all this union business leading up to?" "I'm not sure, Win," St. Clair said. "But I don't much like the signs. They've signed up, rough guess, about 60% of our drivers. That's after years of no real activity. Is that about right, Russ?" "Correct," Fitzpatrick said. "To the best of my calculations. In my discussion with some of the other companies, they seem to be having the same rate of success in those places." "They filled up some church basement the last meeting they had," Philip Talbot said. "But are they actually doing anything?" Winthrop Talbot asked. "Besides collecting dues, Arthur?" He smiled at the men around the table. "Getting rich?" "This Kovac is giving us the most trouble," St. Clair said. "The drivers seem to like him." "Why can't we hire him then?" Winthrop Talbot said. St. Clair had a wry smile on his face. "I've tried, but he won't listen." Winthrop Talbot seemed incredulous. "Is he one of these anarchists?" "No, not as far as we've been able to tell. He's held a succession of small jobs. He's been unsuccessful at all of them. His father died recently." "Did he?" Winthrop Talbot said. "Well, I'm sure his family needs money then. Offer him some more money." "He refuses to listen," St. Clair said. "We even tried to convince him." "Oh?" Winthrop Talbot smiled. "And?" "And he still refuses to listen." "Perhaps," Winthrop Talbot said, "you weren't persuasive enough." "At their last meeting," Fitzpatrick said, "the word strike was used." "Strike?" Winthrop Talbot said. He got up from the table and walked to the window, his back to the men. "Well," he said, We certainly don't want any damn strike occurring here. He walked back to the table and puffed on his cigar. You can convince him, Art, he said. He smiled. I know these foreigners down in the flats. They're good, simple people. They love to laugh and have a fine time. Marvelous musicians, you know. I like many of them. No real fiber, though. Sooner or later, this fellow will listen to us. A radio in the living room crackled, I can't give you anything but love, baby. And Johnny stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, humming along with it, preening. His hair was slicked with grease. He wore a new second-hand suit that he had bought yesterday at the Volunteers, along with his new second-hand 10-cent tie. He adjusted the tie, ran the comb through his usually unruly hair, saw that a single strand was still out of place, and smoothed it. He looked himself in the eye, turned to profile, and tried to peer his eyes around to see himself. He laughed. The phone rang in the kitchen. Johnny, his mother said. Abe. He took the phone, saw his mother glance at him, and noticed that she was staying in the room, trying to overhear his conversation. The car, Abe? He said, watching his mother, grinning. Tonight? I can't do that, Abe. I got a date. Never the hell mind with who. He noticed his mother's rising interest. Yeah? I told you she wanted to go out with you. I was starting to worry about you, Abe, you know that? He glanced at his mother. Thought you'd heard it somehow, Abe. You know what I mean? Pulling on it all the time? Ilona Kovac blushed and, flustered, left the room hurriedly. Johnny laughed and hung up. He reached into a cupboard, pulled down an old bottle of wine, tilted it to his lips, and took a big slug. His mother walked back into the room, saw the wine bottle in his hand, looked at him, and said, Valentino! He grinned. Gotta go, Ma. You no eat? I'll eat later, Ma. You should eat, Johnny. No drink. He laughed, grabbed his suit coat, which was draped over a chair, and started walking away. His mother said, A nice Hungarian girl, Johnny? He looked at her and smiled. She's colored, Ma. Fakete, karom fakete. She shook her head and looked away impatiently, and he suddenly rushed to her, laughing, twirling her around and kissed her in a flurry. You ought to see her, Ma, he laughed. Prettiest colored girl you ever saw. Ah, you, she said. He laughed, reached for the bottle of wine again, and finished what was in it. He drove the jalopy down the narrow residential street, craning over, looking for her address. It was warm, an early evening in spring, and the street teemed with activity. Children played hopscotch, women gossiped on their stoops, men puffed corncob pipes on their porches. Johnny was uncomfortable in his new suit. The tie choked him. His hair felt like warm glop on top of his head. He finally found Anna's house, but couldn't park the jalopy in front of it. 2 doors down, he found a spot, thought about putting his suit coat on, then said to hell with it and left it in the car. When he got out of the jalopy, he felt the whole street watching him. A fat, drooping, mustached man in an undershirt was playing an accordion on a second-story porch. But he stopped playing when he saw Johnny getting out of the car and waved excitedly to his wife, who came running out to the porch. Conscious of all the eyes, of all the amused smiles, Johnny walked to the house. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the accordionist and his wife were leaning over the porch and watching him. Johnny knocked on the door. There was no answer. He knocked louder. Still no answer. He could hear the accordionist laughing. He could feel the sweat soaking through his shirt. He was ready to pound his fist on it when Anna opened the door. Jesus Christ, Anna, he said. We've got a date. I've been waiting. She looked at him, her green eyes darkening. We don't have no date, she said. She slammed the door in his face. He stood there dumbfounded. He didn't know what to do. He could hear the accordionist's hoarse laugh. It seemed like the whole street was laughing at him. He stomped angrily back to the car and slammed the door. The accordionist started playing again. The jalopy roared off. Abe walked down the street with Molly, laughing with her, kidding her. It was dark now and the streets of the flats were filled with people out for a Saturday night walk. Molly was just telling him how she always had to be ready for anything in a tavern filled with hard-drinking men when Abe saw the jalopy stop suddenly in the middle of the street. Johnny jumped out of the car. His shirt was sweated through. His tie was unbuttoned. His suit coat was wrinkled and thrown over his shoulder. Johnny ran over to them. The jalopy was still in the middle of the street, its motor running. Molly and Abe were flabbergasted. "Johnny," Abe finally said, "what are you doing?" "Take the damn car," Johnny yelled. The people on the street stopped and stared at them. "What's the matter with you?" Abe said. "Where's your date?" Johnny stalked away from him and shouted, "Just take the damn car, will you, Abe?" They stared after him, stunned, as he disappeared down the street, then looked at the jalopy in the middle of the street, its motor running. "Jesus," Abe laughed. They got into the car, and after a while, Molly said, "Is he always like that?" "That's just his way," Abe said. "Is he your best friend?" Abe laughed. "Johnny? He's my brother." Molly didn't say anything for a moment. "There's something about him," she said haltingly. "He looks at me like—" "Ah, you're pretty, that's all," Abe said. Molly didn't say anything. "Hell, you're beautiful." She smiled. "You're gorgeous," Abe said. "You're worse than him," Molly laughed. They went to see Young Men of Manhattan, and when Ginger Rogers said, "Cigarette me, big boy," and everyone in the theater laughed, Abe hesitantly put his arm around her. She noticed his hesitancy, grabbed his hand, pulled the arm completely around her, snuggled closer to him, and smiled. He kissed her good night outside her tenement apartment, looked at her seriously, and said, wary and shy, "Tomorrow night?" She didn't say anything, watched him, amused. "Tomorrow afternoon, maybe?" he said. "We could go for a ride." Molly laughed. "Cigarette me, big boy," she said coyly. They laughed, and Abe kissed her again, and then Molly said, "Tomorrow afternoon." She waved a last time at him and walked to the tenement door. Abe skipped happily down the street toward the jalopy. It was late now, and there were few people in the street, and as he approached the car door, he saw a man leaning against a car parked behind his. He was a hawk-faced, pale man with blonde hair and a jagged scar running down the right side of his face. "Nice night, huh, Abe?" the man said. He laughed. The laugh sounded more like a high-pitched giggle. Abe looked around and saw two other men behind him now. "We'll give you a ride," the scar-faced man said. He laughed again. The two men behind him grabbed Abe's arms, and the man with the scar opened the back door of the car for him. "After you, Abe," he said. The man with the scar drove. Abe was hemmed in by the two in the back. The windows were shut tight. It was hot, and they were all sweating. They stopped the car by the riverbed in the flats, and for a moment nothing happened, and nothing was said. Then the one with the scar backhanded Abe viciously across the mouth, and the two in the back hit him with their fists. The door was opened, and he was dumped out onto the ground. He was kicked in the stomach, and then they just stood there, laughing at him. The one with the scar went back to the car, opened the trunk, took something out, and walked back. Abe watched him as he came closer. He saw what he was holding now. It was a 3-foot-long rubber hose. The Scarface swung it and giggled again. Dr. Rosen was a thin little man with a long and bushy black beard, and as he hovered over Abe, who was lying on Johnny's bed, bandaged and semi-conscious, Johnny and Mike Monahan watched him from the doorway. The doctor came out of the room, shaking his head and angry, and Monahan said, "How bad is it, Doc?" "A rib. Cracked, maybe," the doctor said with a Yiddish accent. "His left leg, I don't know, maybe broke." Johnny's mother, who had come in from the kitchen, heard this and crossed herself. "Jesus Maria," she said. "Inside damage," the doctor said. "Maybe he will be lucky." "Lucky?" Johnny smiled. "He should be in the hospital," the doctor said. "They'd call the cops, Doc." "So?" the doctor said. "The police. The cops don't like us." Dr. Rosen shook his head again and went to the door. "How much, Doc?" "I come by. Look tonight," the doctor said. "Thanks, Doc." When the doctor had left the room, Ilona Kovac said, "I tell you, don't make no trouble, Johnny." "Ma, please." "You see what happens," Ilona Kovac said. "Always trouble." "Ma," he said, "please don't." His mother left the room, and Johnny slumped down in the living room across from Monahan. He said nothing a moment. Then he dug a greeting card out of his pocket and handed it to Monahan. The card said best wishes for a speedy recovery. It was signed by Arthur St. Clair. Monahan looked at the card and said, "Those bastards, those filthy cocksucking bastards." "That ain't enough, Mike," Johnny said quietly. Monahan looked at him questioningly. "What are we gonna do about it, Mike?" "We can't call the cops, Johnny." "Cops? Who's talking about cops?" Monahan said. "I don't understand. What are we gonna do about it?" "What can we do, Johnny?" Monahan said. "We got no pull. They got the cops. They got the judges. They got—" "No more kid games, Mike," Johnny said. He picked the card up and looked at it. "That son of a bitch," he said, his voice violent and low. "He's gonna eat this." He looked at Monahan and crumpled the card in his fist. There were so many men at the meeting that they were sitting on the floor and standing against the walls. Their voices were loud and angry. "We can't just go running out and strike," Higgins said. "Just like that. I mean, what Rafferty said. Everybody gets the screw then. What the hell, Johnny? I didn't sign up here to lose my job." Higgins looked at the men. "Huh? Did we?" A few cheered him. Others catcalled. "Sit down, Higgins," someone yelled. "You company suck, Higgins." Higgins spun around in anger. "You talking to me?" he said. Johnny got up angrily. "Hold it now, goddammit," he yelled. "I said, hold it." The men quieted down and listened to him. "Nobody calls nobody else a suck in here," Johnny said. "I told you guys when you signed up, you make the goddamn decisions. That's what we're doing. Nobody start calling each other all kinds of names." The men were very quiet now. "Listen, Tom," Johnny said to Higgins. "Yeah, you're right. You didn't sign up to get the can, but you signed up so we can help you. So everybody who signed up can help the other guy, right?" "Well, yeah," Higgins said. "That's right, I guess." "Okay," Johnny said. "But all we've been doing so far is talking. And all you've been doing is coming in here and looking at each other's faces. And all they've been doing is beating the shit out of us. Ain't that right?" Higgins didn't say anything. "Well, come on, Tom. How about it?" "Yeah," Higgins said. "But that don't mean we ought to strike." "No, it don't," Johnny said. "But tell me something, Tom. We made anything better for you yet? They paying your doctor's bills? Your kids' bills? They paying you overtime? They paying you any more than when you signed up here? Huh?" Higgins didn't say anything. "Fuck no, they're not. And they ain't gonna neither, long as we sit around here on our ass." "That's right, Johnny," one of the men yelled. "They ain't gonna," Johnny said, his voice hard and intense now, "lest we push 'em." A few of the men cheered. "I don't want to strike no more than you do, Tom," Johnny said, "but I don't want to just keep talking either while they keep busting us up. So what Mike and me are going to do, we're going to go in and talk to him. We're going to go see Talbot. And if that don't work, I don't know, then we'll see. How's that?" The men cheered in approval. "All right with you, Mike?" Johnny said. "Fine with me, Johnny," Monahan said. "You want to take a vote?" "All those in favor of Johnny and me going in," Monahan said, "get 'em up." The men put their arms up into the air. "All right," Monahan said, "that's it." He banged his gavel and the men started to leave. "Hey, Johnny," Higgins yelled challengingly. The men looked at him. The room quieted. Higgins smiled. "Don't take no shit from him neither," he said. Johnny waited for her one morning in the doorway of the dime store. He watched her walking down the street towards him. She was wearing a green dress the color of her eyes. Her long blonde hair was blowing in the wind. When she saw him, she put her head down and tried to get by him into the dime store without even looking up. He blocked her way and grabbed her arm. "Let go of me," Anna said loudly. "What'd you do it for?" he said. "Let me go," she tried to pull her arm away. "God damn it," he said, angry now. "Just tell me why." They had attracted a small group of interested and smiling onlookers. "You were drunk," she said loudly. "I was what?" "I smelled it on you." "I wasn't drunk." "Now you're lying," she said. Look, I wasn't drunk. I had some of my old man's wine. He made it. I don't go out with drunks, she said. I just had a little bit, Anna. It's for special occasions. It was a goddamn special occasion, wasn't it? She looked at him and softened a bit. The gentlemen who take me out. Aw, shit, he said. The gentlemen who take me out park the car and wear suit coats. Then they. I had my goddamn suit coat, he said. You did not. It was in the car. Well, she said, they don't leave him in the car. It was hot, Anna. They wear their suit coats and they knock on the door and they talk to my mother and. He laughed. Your mother? He said. Your mother? What the hell am I going to talk to your mother about? She seemed stumped for a moment. Then she blurted, The weather. The weather? He cried. The weather. Jesus Christ, Anna, he said. And they wait for me in the living room. Then they walk me out to the car. Johnny looked at her amazed. And open the door for me. Sometimes they even bring me flowers. He stared at her in utter disbelief. Flowers? He said. Flowers. She turned from him suddenly and went in the dime store. He looked after her a moment and then he shouted, You're nuts. You know that, Anna? Raving goddamn nuts. The chair at the head of the massive oak conference table on the 8th floor of the Talbot building was empty. On one side of it sat Philip Talbot, Arthur St. Clair, and Russell Fitzpatrick. Two empty chairs faced them on the other side of the table. When Johnny and Mike Monahan walked into the room, Philip Talbot got up and said, My father should be here in a moment, gentlemen. I'm sorry for the delay. Please sit down. He motioned them to the two empty chairs and Mike Monahan said, That's all right, Mr. Talbot. We got the time. What the hell? He smiled nervously. The three men returned the smile condescendingly and Johnny and Mike Monahan sat down in the empty chairs. What are we sitting here for, Mike? Johnny whispered to Monahan. What? What do you mean, Johnny? Monahan said. If he's going to sit over here, Mike, Johnny whispered, at the head, then you ought to sit over there at the other end. This is okay right here, Monahan said. Johnny glared at him. No, it ain't, he said. He got up and took his chair and Monahan's to the other end of the table and placed Monahan at its head. The three men watched them in disbelief. Johnny sat down next to Monahan and grinned at them, a distance removed from them now across the table. Winthrop Talbot walked into the room and said, I'm sorry I'm late, gentlemen. These meetings? He looked at the table arrangement, saw Monahan and Johnny at the other end, and said, Why don't you move down here? Perhaps we can hear each other better. Nah, this is fine, Johnny grinned. Unless you guys want to come down here. Winthrop Talbot smiled at him. Of course, he said. Go ahead, Philip, Russ. Winthrop Talbot and the men moved down to the other end of the table, leaving Monahan at its head. Johnny and Winthrop Talbot smiled at each other. St. Clair said, You know Mr. Monahan, Win, and this is Mr. Kovac. Chief organizer, Johnny said quickly. The chief organizer, St. Clair smiled. Well, Mr. Kovac, Winthrop Talbot smiled. What is it that we can do for you? Mike's the president, Johnny said. He's going to lay it out for you. Winthrop Talbot smiled at Johnny and said, Certainly, Mr. Monahan. The thing of it is, Mike Monahan said fumblingly, the men in our local are upset about some things. Well, we wanted to talk them over with you. I'm always happy to discuss the men's problems, Winthrop Talbot said. I like our men. I want them to be happy. There's the matter of insurance, Mike Monahan said. Doctor's bills. The way the men see it, the company ought to be paying the docs when any of the guys get hurt, and maybe set up some kind of insurance policy for the wife and kids. Winthrop Talbot looked at St. Clair. How do we stand on that, Arthur? Our policy is the same as that of the other companies, St. Clair said. While we don't have our own insurance program, as you know, we have on occasion lent some of our men money, at the standard rates, for medical emergencies. Fitzpatrick said, Some of our men have personally expressed their appreciation to me. Winthrop Talbot nodded approvingly. Mike Monahan said, I was thinking, Mr. Talbot, not of you lending the money, but of you paying the bills. Well, Winthrop Talbot said, our policy, as Arthur said. Johnny interrupted him. He had a tight smile on his face. His voice was calm and low. He kept his eyes on Talbot's. "We're gonna cut your balls off, pal. You know that, don't you?" Johnny said. The room was suddenly very quiet. "What did he say?" Talbot said to St. Clair. St. Clair said, "I told you, Win." "I said we're gonna cut your balls off," Johnny said again, louder now. Winthrop Talbot looked at Johnny and said slowly, "And what exactly do you mean by that crudity, Mr. Kovac?" Johnny grinned. "I mean we're gonna shut your fucking company down." Winthrop Talbot stared at him a moment and then said, "I see." He turned to Monahan. "What other, areas do you wish to discuss, Mr. Monahan?" "Overtime. Pay raises." "Is he speaking for you, Mr. Monahan?" Talbot said. Monahan looked at Johnny nervously, then at Talbot, and said, "Johnny's our organizer, Mr. Talbot. He—" "I see," Talbot said again. He turned to Johnny. "The answer is no, Mr. Kovac," he said. "No insurance, no overtime, no pay raises." Monahan seemed taken aback. Johnny grinned and got up from the table. "Okay, Mike," he said. "Let's go." "Maybe we ought to talk some more, Johnny." "We got his answer," Johnny said. "There's no need to be hasty about anything," Philip Talbot said. Johnny looked at Winthrop Talbot and grinned. "It's your balls," Johnny said. Winthrop Talbot looked at him, his blue eyes chunks of ice. "We'll see whose balls it will be," Winthrop Talbot said. "Yeah," Johnny said. "You're fucking right we're gonna see." "This is my company," Winthrop Talbot considered, alone now in the half-light of dusk in his conference room. No one had ever told him how to conduct his business. He had worked long and hard, and his father and grandfather had worked long and hard, and he would permit no man, no horde of men, to undermine generations of ceaseless and single-minded effort. It was understood from the beginning, naturally, that Winthrop Talbot would one day assume command of the family business, and he had been groomed for it at an early age. He was exposed while young to those things which his station in life would demand knowledge of: the theater, the symphony, the dance, and, of course, to horses. Serious and somewhat withdrawn as a child, he applied himself to his assigned duties. He developed into a superb horseman, and took long rides with his mother through their Clarion Hills estate. Exposed early to tailored clothes and blooded stock and people, Winthrop Talbot took these things as a natural part of his life, as natural as it was to apply himself to the study of business and finance. He attended private schools, graduated with honors from Western Reserve University, spent a year working as the general manager of the Talbot Wagon and Carriage Company to learn the rudiments of the family business, then announced that he was seeking a commission in the horse cavalry and was commissioned as second lieutenant at the age of 24. Upon his return to Cleveland from the Spanish-American War, where he took part in the Kettle Hill assault with Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Roosevelt, he was hailed as a hero. His father immediately named him vice president of all Talbot enterprises. He had built up increasingly complex webs of companies, trusts, and interlocking partnerships, and Winthrop Talbot devoted himself to long hours of financial study. An excellent staff man, he studied reports and statements and learned all aspects of the business. He got married, had 2 children, built himself a separate house on the Clarion Hills estate, supervised construction of the Talbot Building on Public Square, and helped guide his father's business. And in 1918, when his father, having turned the Talbot Carriage Works into the Talbot Automotive Corporation, died of a stroke, Winthrop Talbot took over the business and followed his father's lifelong advice: move boldly. He announced that the Talbot Automotive Corporation would become the Talbot Trucking Company. He had been influenced in his decision by a combination of elements. The first was an act of Congress. In 1916, a measure called the Federal Aid to Roads Act had been passed in Washington. It called for the expenditure of $75 million in state aid to build and improve roads throughout the country. The second element was an act of war. In 1917, France had ordered thousands of American-made trucks for the European war theater. Normally, the trucks would have been loaded on flatbed railroad cars and transported east. Instead, the head of Woodrow Wilson's Highway and Transportation Committee ordered that the trucks be driven to eastern seaports, filled with rifles, uniforms, and other war materiel. Those big trucks, bumping and pitching eastward along rutted rural roads, told Winthrop Talbot that the railroads were dead. His basic plan was simple. He undercut both rail freight rates and the rates of his trucking competitors. At the same time, he took pride in guaranteeing faster deliveries than anyone in the transportation business. He proved to be a genius at scheduling and logistics. He spent long hours studying lines of colored ink on road maps, weighing the merits of primary roads with steep gradients against secondary roads which were flat. He studied city traffic patterns, night versus day hauling, and kept intricate records of all operations. When General Tire introduced pneumatic tires, he was among the first to adopt them. He switched truck manufacturers with equal ease if he felt an advantage was to be derived. From Republics, one of the earliest trucks built for heavy hauling, to Diamond T's, Whites, Macs, Fords, and Internationals. He was the first in line to buy new trucks with hydraulic cylinders which could lift the front end of the truck bed to dump a load of gravel or dirt in seconds. Winthrop Talbot was peering far down the road, and he had made a decision to link his fortune with that of the future of American mobility. Sensing correctly that there would be an explosion of road building for decades to come, he organized his business so he could take advantage not only of the new and better roads, but also of the road building itself. His trucks hauled gravel, cinders, slag, and bricks. They carried away or brought in dirt as the need demanded. They participated in the building of private roads, and they worked under state and county contracts. Once the roads were built, they were immediately used by Talbot trucks hauling food, groceries, steel, tires, lumber, finished goods, and raw materials. From a single terminal in Cleveland, Winthrop Talbot expanded the line outward in ways reaching to Akron, Canton, Youngstown, and Alliance. He made deals with other hauling and transfer companies, then gobbled them up. He built terminals, shaved turnaround times, bought fleets of small trucks to haul small shipments to and from his warehouse staging areas. By 1927, Talbot trucks hauled more tonnage than any other trucking firm in the Midwest. Talbot six-wheelers ran Route 8 from Cleveland to Akron. The Akron-bound trucks, loaded with oxygen tanks and cylinders or steel and iron products, passed Cleveland-bound trucks loaded with rubber goods. And while the state of Ohio load limit for trucks was 20,000 pounds, rare was the driver who hurtled down the road with less than 22. The same was true on the Detroit-Toledo-Cleveland run along Route 102 and US 20, where Talbot trucks loaded with automobile bodies and parts tore up the macadam with unrestrained disregard. With the advent of the Depression, Win Talbot's decision to change the nature of the family business from automotive bodies to truck transport seemed all the more prescient. By 1932, automobile sales had slid to 1.3 million from the 1929 figure of 5.3 million. Many old and solid automobile names had tumbled into bankruptcy or receivership. Locomobile, Moon, Cassell, Gardner, Jordan, Stearns. Even the Peerless Motor Company of Cleveland couldn't survive. It sold its assets and converted its facilities for the production of what it hoped would be a more saleable and profitable commodity, ale. Winthrop Talbot knew that he would survive the Great Depression in prosperity and style, but as he talked to his friends at the Union Club, he grew to fear what they all spoke of in quiet but intense terms: the hordes of unemployed workers ready to be seduced by the agents of communism, hordes which could mean the death of the free enterprise system itself. God damn Roosevelt, Winthrop Talbot thought, alone now in the encroaching darkness of his conference room. It was all Roosevelt's fault. Revolutions always began with multisyllabic, high-toned, and idealistic words. Then, sooner or later, someone walked into your office, smiled, and said they were going to cut your balls off. The accordionist saw the jalopy turning into the street and immediately started laughing and calling for his wife. His wife ran out to the porch, saw the jalopy, laughed, and yelled something in Slavic over the second-story porch next door. By the time Johnny parked the car and got out, they were all out on their stoops and porches, tittering at him, waiting for the show to begin. It was a warm, early summer night, the kind of night where the humidity in Cleveland is suffocating. But when Johnny got out of the car, he reached back inside and got his suit coat and put it on over his dripping wet shirt. He glanced up at the accordionist and saw the fat, mustached man panting at him in great merriment. Johnny reached back into the car and then, clumsily, self-consciously, pulled out a bouquet of roses. The accordionist clapped. Johnny held the bouquet gingerly, as if it were a bomb, and walked to Anna's porch. He looked around at the people in the street watching him, shifted the flowers nervously from hand to hand, and knocked. There was no answer. The accordionist started playing a slow and lugubrious melody. The people in the street laughed. He knocked again. The door opened and a pleasant, middle-aged woman with glasses and a round face stood there looking at him. He blinked, startled. "Hi, I'm Johnny Kovac. I'm looking for Anna's mother. I'm looking for Anna. I got a date with Anna." She smiled. "I'm Mrs. Melsbacchus," she said. "Come in." He walked into the living room, holding the flowers clumsily. "What beautiful roses," she said. "Yeah, I got 'em for Anna." He held the bouquet out to her and said, "Here." "Why don't you give them to Anna when she comes down?" she said. He pulled the bouquet back suddenly. "Oh yeah, sure." He kept shifting the flowers from one hand to the other, and she noticed his discomfort and, smiling, said, "Maybe we should put them in a vase." "That'd be great," he said quickly. He almost flung the flowers into her arms. She walked into another room with the flowers and yelled, "Anna, your friend is here." "I'll be right down, Mama," Anna said. He sat on the couch in the living room, sweating, waiting. He started to unbutton his tie, then stopped and tightened it, making sure that it was on right. Anna's mother came back with the flowers in a vase, saw him squirming on the couch and wiping his brow, and said, "Can I get you a lemonade?" "Lemonade? Sure." "Something stronger?" She smiled. "A glass of wine, maybe? A cold beer?" He hesitated, then said, trying not to grimace, "Nah, the lemonade's fine, thanks." She brought him the lemonade and sat down across from him. He took the glass and gulped half of it. His hand shook slightly. He put the glass down and he and Anna's mother looked at each other. "Gee," he said, eyeing her. "This heat's really something, huh?" She smiled slightly. "The humidity from the lake, I think." "Yeah, I like it when it gets cold. You can feel yourself breathe." "This is one of the hottest spells we've had in years," she said. He wiped his brow. "No shit." He almost choked on it. "Oh my God," he said to himself. "Oh my God." He coughed and corrected himself. "No lie," he said. Anna came bounding down the stairs, wearing a thin summer dress which accentuated her figure. "What have you two been talking about behind my back?" she said brightly. She saw the flowers. "Oh, what beautiful roses. Johnny, you shouldn't have." "The weather," he said. "We've been talking about the weather." "The weather?" She smiled at him. Their eyes met. "I love it when it's so nice and warm," Anna said. "Don't you, Johnny?" He got up from the couch and said, "Yeah, it's great. You ready?" "Johnny was just saying how much he likes the cold." I like it both ways," he said, "when it's hot and cold." They started walking out. He was almost pushing Anna out the door. "Have fun," her mother said. "I'll try, Mama," she said, smiling. He caught the crack and looked at her, then at her mother. "Thanks for the lemonade and all," he said. Her mother smiled. "It was nice meeting you." "Yeah, well, bye." On the porch, he stiffly offered Anna his arm. She took it and he walked her down to the car. The accordionist and his wife and the neighbors were all staring at them. Johnny opened the door for Anna, closed it, glanced up, and saw the accordionist laugh in his face. He got into the car, turned to her, and said, "Okay?" She smiled. "You can take your suit coat off, you know." "Nah," he grinned. "I never go no place without it. I'm a gentleman, Anna." He laughed, started the motor, put his left arm out the window, and saluted the accordionist as he pulled away, with the upraised middle finger of his left hand. Riding the roller coaster at Luna Park, she screamed. He put his arm around her. She left it there. When they got off, laughing and dizzy, they stumbled into each other. He put his arm around her again, supporting her, but she brushed it off. He stopped, looked at her, then put his hand out and grinned. She smiled at him and took his hand. At a gaudy penny arcade inside the amusement park, they watched a group of people around a machine. The machine was a toy boxing ring with two toy figures of boxers operated by levers. Johnny and Anna watched for a while, and then Johnny turned to her and said, "You want to fight?" He grabbed a lever excitedly. She hesitated, looking around ladylike. "Sissy," he said. She grabbed the other lever. He plunked a penny into the machine and they manipulated their fighters. Johnny's lever didn't work. His fighter stood in one place. Anna's fighter threw a punch at him and knocked him out. A sign went up on the machine that said KO. "Who's the sissy?" She laughed. He laughed and pulled her away toward another machine in the corner. Inside a glass case was a crane which stood over a large pile of penny treasures, miniature pocket knives, cars, cigarette lighters, diamond engagement rings. A sign atop it said, Mountain of Gold. Johnny dropped a penny into the machine. The knife, he said excitedly. Get the knife. The crane stuck to something and popped it into the slot. He reached in, grabbed it, and held it up. It was a diamond engagement ring. What the hell am I going to do with this? He said. He looked at her and grinned. Oh, no. You can give it to your mother or something, he said. He held the ring in midair. Their faces were close together, looking at it. Hey, Johnny, someone said. They turned, still close together, the ring between them. Vince Doyle stood there with Jocko and two cheap-looking, heavily rouged women. You getting married, Johnny? Vince Doyle grinned. He eyed the ring. It came out of the machine, Johnny said. Vince Doyle looked at Anna appreciatively and said, She come out of the machine too? Anna flinched and looked away from him. Doyle laughed. Here you're becoming a real labor leader, Johnny. We're up over 300 men, Vince. Doyle smiled. They're gonna cream you, Johnny. The smile was still on his face. You'll never know what hit you. Nobody says they're gonna slice that old man's nuts off. Not in this town. We got a lot of guys, Vince, he said. Tough guys. Pigeons, Vince Doyle said, his tone harsh. Bear hanging off their bellies. That's what you got, Johnny. Johnny stared at him and said nothing. I gotta go, kid, Vince Doyle said. He winked at Anna. Bye, doll. Vince Doyle and his friends walked away from them, and Johnny stood there in the penny arcade, his mood shattered. He realized that the ring was still in his hand. He turned to Anna. You want this? Who are those people? She said. You want it or don't you? Are all your friends like that? She asked. He turned on her harshly. Yeah, all of them. So what? She looked at him. He saw the fear in her eyes. Oh, come on, he said disgustedly, his voice broken. I'll take you home. In the sweltering hot church basement, the men were subdued and grim. Johnny spoke to them, but without force, quietly. I don't see what the hell else we can do. No insurance, no overtime, no pay raises. He paused. What the hell are we supposed to say? We back off now, we're never going to get any of it. He paused again. We're going to be a bluff, he said, his voice almost a whisper. He looked at the men a moment, then sat down. They were absolutely quiet. None of them cheered. Monahan got up, looked at the men, and cleared his throat. He waited, not knowing what to say. We go out against Talbot, he said. I know the way it's going to be. I know the kind of clout they got. He paused. But it's like being on the road, passing, and a guy's coming at you full bore. And what are you going to do? You either hit the guy you're passing or smash full into the guy coming at you. It ain't any better than that. He paused. I know it. He stopped, looked down, and cleared his throat again. Now we got no place to go. Either we do this or we get licked. And maybe we're going to get licked anyway. Some of the men grinned. I'm going to pass these papers back to you, Monahan said. Put down a yes or no, whether you want to strike or not. He looked at the men reflectively. Me? I'm going to vote yes. I've been driving a lot of years. You get tired eating shit. The men got their pieces of paper and marked them. They passed them back to Monahan and Johnny. They waited impatiently. The room billowed with clouds of smoke. Johnny got up and looked at them. We're going to strike, he said quietly. For a moment there was stunned silence, then a loud, thunderous cheer. Then, just as suddenly, the cheer died and the men stood there, looking at each other. When Johnny got home that night, Abe was waiting for him in the living room. He was on crutches, hobbling around. What happened? Abe said urgently. What are you doing up? Johnny said. Come on, Johnny, what happened? We're going out on strike, Johnny said quietly. We're going out? Abe said, loud and excited. Oh, Jesus, Johnny, we did it. We're going to beat 'em. We did it, Johnny. We're going to get the bastards. Jesus! He hobbled toward Johnny on his crutches and fell to the floor. You dumb shit, Johnny said. What the hell's wrong with you? The doctor? Abe ignored him. He got up from the floor and continued. We'll show 'em. They can't push the little guy around. Johnny, you're something, boy. You did it, Johnny. Johnny turned away from him. Yeah. Abe looked at him. What's the matter with you? I don't know, Johnny said. He shook his head. You think we're doing the right thing? What? Hell yeah. We got something good. Something that can help guys that have never been helped before. It's worth it, Johnny. Johnny looked at him. I wonder what they'll pull. Listen, Abe said. We'll take our lumps. What's new? We've been taking them since we've been kids. That's for sure. With guys like me out there, Abe said, we can't lose. We can't, huh? You know how good I am at taking a punch? Primo carnera, Johnny grinned. Ain't you, Abe? I'm the champ, Abe said. I can take a punch better than any guy you know. Johnny faked a punch at him and laughed. Early the next morning, a small dirt truck pulled up to Talbot's consolidated gate. Johnny, Monahan, Higgins, and some 20 men jumped down, signs in their hands. They milled about on the sidewalk. Uniformed guards with shotguns stood facing them on the other side of the gate. Johnny stuck a sign on the fence that said, F.I.S.T. Local 302, on strike. A burly guard walked to the fence as Johnny put the sign up. He held his shotgun so it was only a few feet from Johnny's face. Johnny looked at the guard and grinned. I want Slim here, Johnny said, to hear this so he'll know the rules. We're on strike. That means no trucks come in here, no trucks go out. This is the boundary. He smashed the fence with his fist. The guard, startled, stepped back. Johnny grinned at him. We don't go in there, Johnny said. Slim and his girlfriends don't come out here. One more thing. Nobody does nothing on his own. Nothing. You got that? The men nodded, milling about. Hey, Johnny, Higgins said. Can I go take a leak? The men laughed. Winthrop Talbot and St. Clair watched them picketing from the third floor of the consolidated terminal. Are the police ready? Winthrop Talbot said. They'll be arrested the minute they destroy any property, St. Clair said. Talbot nodded and watched the picket line. What this country needs, he said slowly, is Douglas MacArthur. And that'll be the end of F.I.S.T. Chapter 10. Thank you for listening to the Workers' Reading Room. I hope you all have a good one.